Good morning to everybody in the time zones of the United States, and welcome to everyone joining us for this webinar today. My name is Jeff Rathke. I'm the president of the American German Institute at Johns Hopkins University, and we're very proud to present today's webinar on networks in climate policies with our visiting scholar, Daniel Rasch. I'm looking forward to hearing his presentation and the discussion that's going to ensue. But my job right now is to hand things over to my colleague, Senior Fellow and Director of the AGI Society, Culture, and Politics Program, Dr. Eric Langenbacher. Eric, I'm going to let you take it away from here, and I look forward to hearing what we're going to learn today.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, it is my great pleasure to briefly introduce our speaker, one of our current AGI DAAD fellows, Dr. Daniel Rasch, who is a researcher in public policy and public administration with a focus on substantive areas such as energy, environment, and security. He's had academic positions at the University of Public Administration in Speyer for empirical research methods, as well as at the Fernuniversität Hagen. His PhD a couple of years ago focused on framing and lobbying success in the multi-level governance context of the European Union, and this is where he's done most of his research. Currently, however, he's looking at interest mediation in German federal ministries, investigating networks and power distribution within policy areas within the federal administration, using a vast array of methods ranging from qualitative and quantitative text analysis to network analysis. And so today, the topic of his presentation, which is what he has been researching the last little while here in Washington, D.C. at AGI, is called Networks and Climate Policies, Policymaking in Germany and the United States. So we're going to get some really interesting comparative insights into how these processes play out in both of these kind of national contexts. So let me also note to all of our attendees that once Dr. Rasch finishes his brief presentation, we will open it up to questions and answers. And I would ask that you please type your question into the Q&A box that you can see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then I will collect and amalgamate questions, which I'll then pose to Daniel. So without further ado, Daniel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Eric, for this fantastic introduction. Very pleased to be here, and let me expand also my gratitude to the AGI and all its staff for giving me this platform and the opportunity for this research. Let me quickly pull up my slides here so that you can see some of the results that I would like to present from my research here during the stay at the AGI. The big puzzle, and I'm going to present it on the next slide, that I was confronted with, or felt confronted with, started with the whole climate and climate policies discussion with the Paris Agreement. And I would like to take this opportunity because it is going to start again, the climate conference, the UN climate conference tomorrow in Dubai. And so this is a good opportunity to take stock, right? To see where we're at and what did we do? What did the countries actually do after the Paris Agreement in 2015, the last legally internationally binding agreement on this matter. And whereas Germany was fully committed, and I put this in quotation marks, as you can see, because we can discuss this full commitment maybe later on. You obviously know that the United States opted out of this agreement in November 2020, so during the Trump administration, but then opted in again directly after the inauguration of President Biden in February 2021. And comparing these two countries, I think, is very fascinating. Obviously, there are many differences between these countries, but also very much and very many similarities between those two countries. But the big question is, as I said, taking stock, where do we stand? Are there differences also in these climate policies? And if yes, which ones are they, and why are this the case? Obviously, as I said, comparing those two countries is interesting. Germany is currently #1 economy in the European Union. Obviously, United States #1 economy in in the world, and this struggle, this balancing act between finding the right policies, finding the right incentives, and yeah, balancing this economic and environmental protection issues is very, I think, interesting. And this was kind of the puzzle to me, and I wanted to invest a little bit more time and research into this. And let me start briefly with this very, very broad goals and the current commitments that both countries currently have. And we can also see some differences here. I highlighted them in red. So you can find these goals, these commitments on the White House web pages or on the responsible ministries in Germany. And the first thing you're gonna notice is that Germany is a little bit more into reaching this 75% greenhouse gas emission reduction from the levels of the 1990s, whereas the United States say we do 50 to 52% below the 2005 levels. Germany uses this 1990 levels, obviously for one reason, because that's the point of our reunification. Another maybe additional interesting fact about that is that we also had a lot of old industry plants from the GDR, which we get rid of. We closed them down very early on in the 1990s. So a lot of greenhouse gas emission reduction was already done in the 1990s. So yeah, there's a huge discrepancy between the 1990 level in greenhouse gas emissions in Germany to the 2005 ones. In the United States, these differences are marginal. They're not really like big. Also, we see in the second row that the net zero emissions economy is also planned to be achieved a little bit earlier in Germany in 2045, and the United States says 2050. But then on the other hand, we see the full commitment kind of to say that the carbon pollution-free electricity production by 2035 in the United States will be 100%. And in Germany, we're a little bit skeptical about this and say nearly, and the ministry says größtenteils in Germany. And this probably has to do with our current struggles in our energy crisis. You probably know about the war in Ukraine, the illegal invasion of Russia that forced us to look for other sources of energy. We're heavily dependent on the gas from Russia. We struggle with our renewable energy expansion goals. We have not reached our expansion goals for wind power expansion in several years now. And we also shut down our nuclear power plants in April this year, which kind of leads us to this struggle of our Energiewende, of an energy transition phase. And this also leads to a big discussion in Germany. Can we reach this goal by 2035? And as you can see, there's this current skepticism, which only leads to nearly 100%. Germany also had emission reduction goals per year. You can see emission reduction goals and acceleration of energy in the sectors in the US, but without the goals per year. So Germany is setting these goals. I want to achieve these goals every year. And another difference that we can find on this very general commitments or goals is that the United States says that they are delivering 40% of the benefits from federal investments to disadvantaged communities. And we have no federal plan, at least, for our communities. But this is, as I said, just the general, very general goal and commitments. And the big question is, how do they get generated, and how do we get there? How is this output then generated? And when I wanted to look here in this research, and what I did during the years, and Eric said this already, is I was focusing a lot of my time on lobbying and interest mediation in general. And it starts with a general assumption that decision makers are faced with incomplete information in an uncertain environment. They have to find decisions, and they have to find information, and they are in need of external information. Yes, we have such institutions like the Congressional Research Service, and we have a similar thing in Germany, but even those cannot generate all of the information that is needed. So there is some kind of dependency from external information. But also at the same time, we think, or we see, that interest mediation as a general term and lobbying as one specific strategy out of this interest mediation system, see that as a democratic principle, right? Our democracy is not really based on this, but we see that this is for us normal. The term lobbying in the German context has a very negative connotation. In the American context, it's kind of normal to talk about this term, lobbying. And this idea of bringing the society into the decision-making process goes back. I think you can already find some of these in Aristotle's Politeia, so in the Greek ancient times. But you also see or read this in the Federalist Papers. For example, the number 10 by James Madison. You can read this by Alexis de Tocqueville. So the reasons why there are associations and the reasons why there are organizations is very simple. Citizens have collective interests, and they generate them through these organizations. And this is kind of a counterpart to the ideas and the interests of the state, of the government. So this interconnection is kind of what we want in our democratic society, as long as it happens within the lines of lobbying regulation, right? So the LDA, the Lobbying Disclosure Act, for example, in the US is one of the strong examples of a very strict regulation in this area. And as I said, interest mediation and lobbying is a very broad concept. And I would like to look more closely into the terms of consultations. And here in this study, you're looking at hearings in Congress and written statements in the German ministries. Why those two? These are the first anchor points, the first access points to decision-making in both countries. Why not the German parliament? We have this interconnection between executive and legislative branch that most often, if you look at how the policies get generated, they're actually drafted within the ministries of the ruling party and then brought into parliamentary system. So our two branches are somewhat interconnected at this stage. Why do we need this? As I said, bringing interest from the society in increases the input legitimacy of decisions. As a citizen, as an organization, I have the possibility to get my interests heard, to get them maybe even listened to, right? And if I am part of this process, obviously lobbying or these consultations can also increase the output legitimacy, the acceptance of decisions, because I was part of this process of decision making. I am also accepting this stronger. So I'm using a very special method here, which is the method of social network analysis. I'm going to have some graphs for you, because network analysis is always about graphs and see a lot of dots and connections. But I would like to spend a little bit more, 1 second more, maybe on the term access to decision makers. So when we look into lobbying, obviously the holy grail of our whole lobbying research is to get into the influence. Which organization, which actor has the power to move certain decisions into a certain way? This, however, comes along with a lot of methodological hurdles or obstacles, and it's not that easy to do influence studies. So the academic life, the academic structure always looks for proximizations, proxies for this. And access, so having the opportunity to get heard is kind of having access to a decision maker is kind of the minimum requirement for lobbying. So what the consultations foremost do is giving access to the decision makers, and access does not equal influence, and that's very important to highlight this before we go a little bit further. But let me pull out the first graph, and I don't want you to I would like to go through the graph at several points. So this is the graph that I created based on the social networks in climate policies since 2016. So after the Paris Agreement in the US Congress, you see that the US Congress had, I'm going to use my mouse here, hopefully you can see this, had 577 consultations regarding climate change and every policy that refers to this aspect. And you can see nearly 800,000 actors. All these little nodes that you can see is one specific actor. On top, you have the House of Representatives, which is kind of the middle node here, and all the little committees, the gray nodes here are the specific committees. I'm going to highlight some committees in a second. And below, you have the second chamber of Congress, which is the Senate, obviously. And you have also in the middle, like going to further the other gray, several committees of the Senate. And you can see the different bubbles. As I said, nearly 1,800 actors, out of which 22.6% are companies, here highlighted in pink. So everything where you can see a pink bubble or a pink knot, which is a proper term, you have a company. You have also a lot of individual experts, 21.3% of all these actors that are consulted in Congress during this time in green. And you also have a lot of interest organizations, which are blue. Interest organizations also are coded in different ways. So you have out of these 19.5%, you have like 36% business interests and 33% NGOs or environmental interests or public interests, no matter what. In the US, I would also like to point your interests, your highlight to the red dots, which is the local government. So, for example, representatives of cities, these are at a very low percent, 5%, but even like far more than in Germany. So, what can we see in these social networks graphs? First of all, we see that there are certain distances between these nodes. They are calculated according to the frequency of how often an actor got invited. So we see that, for example, in this committee, which is the House Committee on Science, Space and Technology, it has a lot of individual experts, so professors, doctors, lawyers, something like that, so who are not connected to a certain think tank or whatever, so really individual experts. Presented evidence to this committee, and they are in this big bubble because they only appeared once. The more frequent an actor appeared in the committee, so for example, like those nods, they have been invited more than once to this special committee. And you can also see this nods that are dangling between those two chambers, namely the House of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, and those actors are present or have been invited to give evidence in both chambers. So this is why they are in the middle of this graph, and this is the thing. What we can also do with those graphs is calculating a diversity inside these committees. So how diverse of an actor's population is consulted, and you can see that you have a lot of different colors, which is an indicator for a high diversity in this case. I will also highlight the black knots here. These are state representatives, for example, a representative of a state of Hawaii or something like that, right? So these are at the regional state level representatives that have been invited to give evidence to the Congress. Then another, as I said, the companies, another point I would like to point your interest to is this below, where we see a lot of pink bubbles. So we also see that in Senate, there are far more companies invited to give evidence than there are in the House of Representatives. And this is especially the commission or the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources, where you have a lot of companies that have been invited to give evidence into this area. In Germany, it looks very different, right? We only have 46 consultations, right? So 1/10 in the same period of time, 1/10 of what has been consulted or can be decided as a policy regarding climate change or climate policies in general. And we only see 426 actors, right? This is very different from the population in the US, and also the type of actors that are present in these written statements is very different. So one, we see that the majority of actors are actually blue, which are interest organizations, as we have learned out of this. 60% of the majority, 79% business interests, and only 11% public interests. We also see companies which are in pink, and we also see regional government representatives, state ministries, for example, that give evidence here. Again, we have the different frequencies. So, for example, here we have the Ministry for Economic Affairs, which is or has the kind of the most consultations for or in regard to climate change, which is which came along with the after the election, when we had the renaming and new competences given to this ministry, which is now the Economic Ministry or the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Protection. So this is why obviously they have a lot more actors than others. But you also see, like, for example, the Ministry of Infrastructure here, or the Ministry of Environment, you know, and also, again, the distances between those nods are representative for the frequency. So those actors have only been invited once, and those have been invited far more often. Again, one only red dot, right? So this is only one actor from the local, or two from the local, three maybe from the local interest, so very low representative from the communities which have been invited to give a statement, a written statement into the ministry. So as I said, this is kind of the social networks, and we see like how ministries are interconnected and how diverse these populations are. Again, we have sort of many interest groups or interest organizations in the middle, which are invited to either of those ministries, invited to give evidence in those ministries. And what are they consulted on, right? This is a big question. So at the beginning, we had this very general, very broad goal and commitments, but these are the actual policies that the actors were invited to give evidence to. Obviously, I put this in a percentage because, as I said, we have like 577 instances of policymaking in the US and only 46 in Germany. So I transformed this into the percentages. And you can directly see the differences between these instances of policymaking. Germany, for example, if they consult somebody, if they put up a consultation for written statements, they do this mostly, and this is like more than 50%, so 20 something instances of policymaking that are referring to regulatory instruments, right? So they consult those interest groups and those companies and the other actors, saying, what do you think about this and that? This is our plan, right? Before we give this to Parliament, what are your ideas about this? So specific drafts and bills in the German context are more or less in the area of regulating. We have zero public investments in these cases, and we have some framework policies. So direct public investments are something like direct investments, infrastructure investments, these kind of things. And then we have the framework policies where certain programs are developed, and planning documents are issued. We also have like this in Germany very often. And we also have market-based instruments very often, right? So creating incentives, credits, subsidies, tax incentives, all those instruments are also like 10 to 15% probably, and of these 46 instances. In the US, it is quite contrary. So we see the vast majority are soft measures that are discussed with the public or with the experts, and those is obviously the reason for information gathering, oversight issues, presenting first ideas about what might be a policy without having it already worked out, presenting ideas of awareness building, research and development, all these kind of things that are rather soft measures and not really regulatory. So putting those two in context and giving, zooming into two instances in the US and one instance in Germany to give you a little bit more about this difference of policy making, is that you have, at least according to the White House, the two most probably inducing policies, which one is the Inflation Reduction Act and also the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And those were only consulted by or consulted for in the hearings after they were signed into law in 2021 or 2021, right? So we have several hearings on implementation and the effects and work the policies. Do they work the right way of how we wanted them to be? But they are actually like in the later stage consulted on. Whereas the Bundesklimaschutzgesetz, the climate protection law in Germany, there are the written statements requested, as I said, before putting that on the parliamentary agenda because the ministry drafted the law. At least this is the first time. It has to be reformed. It had to be reformed afterwards, but this is the first instance of the Bundesklimaschutzgesetz where written statements were requested for. That's the three instances out of these 577 instances in the US and these 46 in Germany, right? So just to give you an example of how they might work with these. So we have obviously differences in consultations, and I want to highlight some of them in addition. First of all, I think we have a different approach to consultations, right? We see that the Congress consults at the very first stages of decision making before a draft is created, and before this. I mean, there are some examples where there are drafts of laws, draft of bills are discussed, but this is a very different approach, I think, to consultations. The German ministries, as I said, prepare the drafts most often and send those drafts out for comments and request written statements, and then put that on the parliamentary agenda. We have, because there are written statements, a higher number of actors per instance of policymaking in Germany. However, the vast majority, obviously, of those instances are in the US. As I said, 577. That's quite an astonishing number through these years. Where at least some of these aspects were discussed in reference to climate policies and climate change. So obviously the hearings are time limited, and I think the majority, I think I found one hearing where there was a maximum of 14 witnesses that were invited. So 14 people were there given evidence in one committee on one instant of policy at one time. But this is obviously an outlier. So normally there are 3 to 5 witnesses invited. And obviously, this gives you the lower number of actors per instance, just because it's a different way of consulting. We also saw, I think that was obvious in those graphs, that we have a higher diversity of actors, a higher diversity of the population in the US. We see far more between those different actors. We have this very big majority of interest groups, peak level interest groups in Germany that are invited for written statements. And they are the vast of the population. We also see, when we look at those measures that are discussed, that there is a higher diversity of policy fields in the US where climate change is discussed. I thought this is very interesting because I think climate change in the US is discussed more broadly. And you see this, for example, with the Committee of Indian Affairs, where specific climate change or climate effects for those reservations and communities are discussed. You also see this in terms of resilience for infrastructure of armed forces, a discussion that we haven't touched in Germany yet, what climate change might have an effect on these aspects. And for example, you see the Army Corps of Engineers or the DAAD giving evidence and giving thoughts on first, ideas on what maybe climate change could affect the armed forces. So that's also, I think, very fascinating in those terms. And obviously, as I said, I would also like close my presentation with some ideas of the reasons for these differences. And you see at the end that there are 3 dots. So I believe this is an open list. And in academia and in science, we are always voting for more than one factor, which is explaining the things, right? So it's always a kind of interconnection of different variables that we need to explain something. And I would like to point to some aspects that we maybe can discuss later on. First of all, yes, Germany and the United States obviously are very different political systems, and they have very different policy-making procedures. That is for sure. And they also have a different system of federalism. We have a very integrated system of federalism in Germany, where the state level is incorporated into the decision making. They have to be heard as soon as they get touched. And in the US, you have this divided federalism where you have like the state level representatives and the municipalities have to compete with all the other interests at the same level. And this is also very, very interesting. We have a different system of interest mediation. The pluralistic system of the US invites like very broad and very diverse population to give evidence. In Germany, it is very structured. We have these neo-corporatism rules in some areas, in some sectors. It even goes back into the German Empire times, where we still have some path dependency and, for example, obligations in order to, for example, for pharmacists or for painters or for plumbers, in order they have to be in this and that interest organization, right? And this obviously goes back in time. And this is something that, for example, leads to this very high number of interest organizations that are evidently here. I also think that in the case of the US, we can talk a little bit about time pressure, especially because of the opting out of Trump, of the Paris Agreement, and then the opting in of President Biden in 2021 leads to, we have to do something fast. And maybe this is a reason why we don't have the time to consult before we put this on the parliamentary agenda, right? So this is maybe the reason why, for example, those instances of policymaking, the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law, are consulted after they were put in place, right? This might be a thing. In Germany, we always have to think about the European Union influence, especially in wind power, so renewable energies. They made a regulation last year so that, for example, all lawsuits which are of environmental protective reasons are currently forbidden, so that you cannot sue a wind park due to these reasons at the moment. This is goes back to a regulation of the European Union, and this obviously has an effect of the increasing number of wind parks getting built. Also, what we can talk about is political will and societal acceptance. In the end, you have to create policies that are accepted by the society. You have to have the people that are convinced to buy solar panels and put them on their house. And this is obviously something that goes hand in hand with the question of technology and innovation, carbon capture and storage programs, resilient infrastructure. All these aspects probably also have a viable reason for the differences in the climate policies. And I would like to, open this up now to Eric again and your questions. I want to also say this: my research here was in a context of my habilitation project. And if you would like to zoom into those networks graphs, you can do this by clicking on the link, or go on con-networks.com. You can zoom in and look at the names of different nodes, and you can see who's who and who's connected where. And feel free to browse those network graphs and learn a little more about the connections of the populations. Thank you so much for the attention.
Thank you, Daniel. That was a great presentation. So I would just encourage all of our attendees, if you have questions, please to type them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. It might take a few minutes for folks to be able to type out their thoughts. So maybe I will start with a couple of questions and comments. So one of the findings that really kind of struck me was when you were looking at the different types of policies that the two countries have implemented. And in particular, the fact that over 70% of such policy measures in the US were soft measures, whereas that was less than 5% in Germany. Whereas in Germany, more than 50% were regulatory instruments, whereas it looked like about 12% in the United States. So that was a very striking kind of difference between the two countries. And of course, I know that as a value-free social scientific researcher, you're not here to necessarily assess or judge the effectiveness of what's been happening, but I would like to push you on that anyway. So maybe tell me a little bit more about these kind of soft measures, because from one perspective, one can say that it's just rhetoric, right? So, great that they're having all these hearings and all these diverse people are saying something, but it's not leading to anything except a transcript of whatever was said in a hearing, or maybe a viral video of, I don't know, somebody getting really angry and wanting to fight with one of the witnesses, which, has been a recent kind of experience in this country. So tell me a little bit more about these soft measures, and if they are just rhetoric with no real impact, or if that's actually meaningful. Because one of the takeaways would be that, sure, we talk a lot, but we don't do a lot in this country, whereas the Germans are, doing these meticulous regulations and framework policies and all this kind of stuff, which at least superficially seems like it would have that much more of an impact.
Sure. Thank you so much for this question. So to put those numbers a little bit more to reference, it is the fact that only those 577 that were in the hearings, right? So the United States might have had more instruments that are of a regulatory nature that were not have been hearings conducted. That might be the case. I don't have the numbers for this. But so this is just the reference, but you're totally right. And there is this fantastic paper from 1995 from Baumgartner and colleagues, University of Chapel Hill, who already said in the mid of the 1990s that the hearings in Congress actually do not lead to legislative amendments and legislative change. So it might be true that the hearings are for information gathering purposes only, and for invitations. At the same time, we have the same kind of reasoning or arguments for the parliamentary hearings in Germany, where also the different caucuses invite their experts in order to give evidence, which is obviously in the line of certain policies that the caucuses would like to implement. So this is kind of the problem, and this is where probably the ministries are a little bit more, public administration is a little bit more free, right? So when they draft their policies and before they hand them on the parliamentary agenda, it is certain at a very technocratic level, and this is why they're probably more technocratic because it's a very different form of consultations, probably. Yeah.
I can't resist one other kind of point. So one of the other things that obviously struck a person was that there have been 577 consultations in the United States versus only 46 in Germany. And, once again, well, in this case, I guess maybe it makes the United States look better that there's just been so much more of it. And then you also noted that this involved 1,794 actors in the US, but only 426 actors in Germany. Now, again, I don't want to be too much be too pedantic about this, but the United States is 4 times the population size of Germany. So if I were to inflate the German numbers by 4, you get almost exactly the same number of actors, and obviously many fewer kind of consultations. But I couldn't help but think that that was one explanation for the discrepancy in these numbers.
Totally is, yeah, totally true, exactly. So what we have in Germany, as I said, this is a very, very different approach on these consultations, is that very drafted policies or and then that requested. And these instances of policy making in climate policies in these years from 2016 to now, so October 2023 was my endpoint kind of. So in these years, yeah, you only have of these in the ministries. There are probably also some more actors, as I said, in the hearings of the parliamentary committee, but I really wanted to compare the first access point of policymaking. This is why I have the ministries on the one side and Congress on the other side. So this is actually the first time where interest groups can actually give evidence. And also in lobbying research, we have this thing where there's this findings somehow on influence, that the sooner, the earlier an organization can point to their interests and can highlight certain wrongs or rights in a policy, the better they are performing on their success and their influence. So this is why these very early on access points are so important.
All right, I can't resist one more question because I just find your research so interesting, and then I promise I'll get to all the questions that we have in the Q&A now, right? But so the other thing that I wanted a few more thoughts from you on was the impact of business and the private sector in this in all these different kind of consultations, because you had some different figures and maybe I wasn't quite understanding, but in the US I wrote down that 36% of, I guess, the actors were business, but then 23% were companies. And in the German case, you had 79% were business, but only 11% companies. So maybe you could help us understand those proportions a little bit more. And then also, just to simplify things for folks, would you say that there is more corporate influence on the consultation process in one country or the other, or is it about the same? And also, I guess one other quick follow-up. I also thought it was really interesting that there were a lot more business interests invited to the Senate than to the House. So maybe just some thoughts on that too.
Yeah, totally right. Super interesting. The biggest problem that I have with this differentiation between public interest and business interests, I mean, they are standard, right? So in lobby industry, in lobby research, we always do this differentiation between business interests and public interests, and they are right. However, in climate policies or energy policy, I find that there are some sort of mixture of between those two. So especially in renewable energies, we have a lot of businesses that are also for more stricter regulation. So they're also on the public interest side, right? So this is what we have to keep in mind when we talk about business interests. Yes, but in Germany, I think my first hunch was also like, okay, look at all these companies in the Senate. So there's probably a big company influence on those policies. Probably is, but at the same time, Germany is not very different, right? Both countries are very big economies in their regions or even in the world. So yes, finding a good economic solution, finding the right incentives is very important, and this is why it's important to talk to businesses anyway, right? So this is the point, and I think for us in Germany, we don't have that many companies only because of our interest mediation system. So all the peak level interest groups, let's say, for example, the business representatives of those, they pay these interest representatives to represent their interests, and so all the companies actually are members of somewhat of these interest groups, and this is why the numbers are somewhat comparable, I would guess, if we calculate or sum up the economic interests in the US and the economic interests in Germany. So I would say this is true. In the end, influence-wise, as I said, this is a holy grail, right? We all want to get there in lobbying research to find this instance where this specific organization has this and that influence on a policy. As I said, it's super hard to find. There are like different methodological problems of causalities, finding those causalities, and this is hard. There are several good books that highlighted when business lose and when the public wins. In general, I think the idea or the findings in lobbying research nowadays is that business have much more resources and they can be much more present. However, in reference or in relation to public interests, they are not that successful in representing their interests. This is kind of the latest takeaway on this research. Yeah.
Great. All right, let's get into the questions from our audience members. Here's one about whether your research goes further in showing if the positions of the actors who were invited more often to the hearings and consultations actually had an impact on the policy outcomes. That's a great question. Does the frequency of an invitation indicate more actual impact?
That's a good question. Yeah, a very, very good question. I have coded the positions for Germany, so I can exactly say if they are in favor or if they're not in favor. That I can do for the German data set. I haven't done this yet for the American data set. So I would have to go or apply some sort of text analysis to the protocols of the meetings in order to see what were the statements about and are there, for example, pro or contra a certain idea. It's totally doable. Takes a lot of time, but yeah, that's easy to access. And then, you know, from that starting point on, we could do this. In Germany, I can say that the population that is invited is more often in favor. So they're saying this is a good idea, but, and then they list some things that they would like to see changed. We haven't done yet any follow-up research on the question. So if, you know, successful, if those which I have proposed, if these things really get changed later on in the final legislative text, this is yet to come. But yeah, as I said, it's a good question, and yeah, it's in the coming. Yeah.
All right, excellent. Here's another great question, and you know that has to do with I guess extra parliamentary actors. So, what about the social pressures from demonstrations and environmental activists? For instance, Fridays for Future. How does that affect the, I guess, policymaking environment in Germany? Because that seems to be a bit of a difference between Germany and the United States, where such activists have not been as visible, right, or as disruptive as in Germany. So is that another way to look at it, that, you know, the policymakers are also responding to these larger kind of oppositional or social pressures in Germany compared to the United States?
Good. Yeah, good point. So coming from the lobbying research perspective, we normally differentiate between inside strategies and outside strategies. So those consultations and those hearings are more like very formal inside strategies, right? So those actors are already somehow in the networks and are consulted. Those outside strategies that you were referring to, demonstrations and protests and all these things, are super interesting. And I think that this also, like public discussions in the media or in certain like well-known talk shows or whatever. So these things probably do have an impact too. Yet I don't know any studies that point to these effects. So we have like a lot of studies that pointing to the effect of public opinion on policymakers, and then if we can see shifts. One of these shifts, for example, is in our shutdown of the nuclear power plants. You can see that it was initiated by the Green and Social Democrats in the 1990s, end of the 1990s, and then when the Conservatives took over, they obviously prolonged the nuclear power plants. Then Fukushima happened, right? And there was this big public discussion. Maybe we should really get rid of them. And then even the Conservatives say, okay, let's, you know, set an end point of this. So this is one example where you can really see that public pressure has an impact, even if the normal political perspective or political position would not have been in that direction. So this is a very good question, yet I don't have a perfect answer.
All right, another interesting question has to do with the nature of the party systems in both countries. So the US is obviously a two-party system. Germany is now a 6, and if Sarah-Wagenknecht gets any kind of traction, maybe a 7-party system. So how does that affect the kind of the consultations and the policymaking environment? And then I guess related to that, there are perceptions of differences in terms of the size and the impact of government, with that being a larger impact in Germany compared to the United States. So, I guess a two-pronged question, but I'm also very keen to hear your thoughts about how the two-party systems might affect things.
Yeah. So coming from this ministerial perspective, public administration perspective, what we can see in Germany right now, I guess, is that this three-party coalition that we have at the moment leads to a lot of fractions inside those, right? And that is why certain things are not done as easily as they would have been in the two-party coalitions, which was our normal way during the time. And you can really see how these certain parties have their problems in reaching agreements. And there was now 2 days ago a Green Party member where like huge discussion about the future of the party were invoked. So this is very interesting. So I think this is the parliamentary discussion. Yes. On this perspective, I think it is far more difficult to reach agreements at this time. From the statement of, or from the perspective of the public administration, I think it doesn't play such an important role because the drafts that are created by the ministries, by public administration, as I said, are very technocratic, and the processes, and they're drafting the law, and then they put it on parliament. So this is then, out of their hands what the party system then does with it inside the parliament. What it leads to the numbers on the effects of the population of these more party systems or more elaborate party systems, I really don't know. So my hunch is, my educated guess would be that yes, it is now also more difficult to reach or to invite, especially in the hearings, the people, right? So if each caucus has the same right to have or invite witnesses into the hearings according to their proportion in the committee, and I guess this is quite difficult now in order to reach an agreement of who is invited and who is heard to in the hearing. So I guess this is something where probably also might impact on the numbers, but there are no empiric evidence that I could point to where we can actually see. This is just an educated guess.
All right, great. And now we have a multi-part question from our other wonderful AGI DAAD fellow, Andreas Freitag. So he would like to know if it is really the case that regulatory or command and control tools are more effective than incentives. He doubts that. Moreover, is the different network structure explaining the different use of market-based solutions, which I guess really are effective? Mm-hmm. If so, how exactly?
Wow. Okay, this is a two-part question, right? So regarding the regulatory and incentives, I am not an expert in really assessing the effectiveness. It's something that we need to look into. I think it's very interesting in order to these goals that are presented in the beginning, right? Those general commitments. How do we reach them, right? This is the big thing. And we have this Supreme Court decision in Germany now, or the current government planned on 60 million to be invested in climate policies. And now they have to come up with a different plan in order where to get the money for the policies that have planned. And yeah, sure, regulatory gives you an opportunity in how to certain goals can be achieved. But yeah, this is a very interesting thing to assess. So what leads to more effectiveness? I would say it's possible to get into this. I'm not quite sure. I would also say, as a law and order man, I would also say that regulations are more efficient than incentives. But this is just a personal perspective. And the second question was on the different network systems, right? Yeah, so the effect would be, again, that we have to look into these differences between economic and public interests and really see what the positions are. So based on these networks, yet I can give you an idea of who is involved and how the diversities, and maybe even if I look into the positions, are they in favor or against it? But the question of the effectiveness or the really influence is then something that we have to discuss, where we need further studies into those really, as I said, those protocols, and look into what they say and what they actually at the end achieved in the final legislative text. You know, this is the thing. What was really like in the end inside this final legislative text, and is that kind of in the idea of the interest group, interest organization.
All right, well, we're very rapidly coming to the end of our time, but I can't resist one more question kind of from myself. So when you were kind of concluding your presentation earlier, you said that something like you have the impression that climate change issues are overall discussed more broadly in the United States than in Germany, which again is not something that I would have expected. I mean, at least Germany's reputation for a while has been that they've been, you know, at the forefront of real efforts to make the transition to a carbon neutral economy. I mean, Energiewende and all that kind of stuff. And certainly I think in the United States, Germany has had this reputation of really being, you know, a front runner in a lot of these things. So maybe you could just provide a few more details about that. And then related to that, I also have the impression that climate change, all these policies are getting much more politicized in the United States compared to Germany, where it seems that it's an emerging partisan difference between the left, which is supportive, and the right, which seems increasingly less supportive. I mean, I know that the AfD in Germany also likes their coal and stuff like that, but maybe share a few more thoughts about what you mean by it's more broadly discussed. Maybe it's more broadly discussed because it's become this bone of contention, and yet another kind of culture war, polarization topic in this country.
Yeah. Okay, sure. Well, the one thing is, especially when you look now at the question of energy security, I think with all the years of the different coalition governments in Germany, where we try to get closer to Russia, nobody was really questioning our energy security up to the point. And even you have, like, if you look at that, you have the certain points in the dates, so 2008 and 2014, where you can actually see kind of the direction in that Russia was going to, and this discussion of energy security was then more broadly discussed in the government really after the illegal invasion. And this is, you know, something where I think the US are like one step further. So they're discussing climate change in far more different directions than I would have thought. So, for example, the effects of those disadvantaged communities, the effects on the Indian affairs, especially also on the armed forces as a position. So this is what I meant with more broadly. So climate change and climate effects are assessed in various different ways. And I think this is where the US is going further than the Germany is. Germany is very good in the regulation and in committing to goals and setting goals and all that stuff. So I think this is where I see a little advantage towards the German policies. Yeah, but I also say that this is much more side effects of climate change are discussed in the US. Also, which brings us probably to the higher number of consultants of hearings, because there are so many different aspects, and every committee tries to find their angle on climate change. I think this is great, right? And as I said, it's very dense in Germany, densely discussed in Germany. On the question of politicization, I think yes. So the discussion of climate change, when it started in Germany, getting really into the focus after the Paris Agreement, the last really international binding agreement, and now we have to set these certain goals. I think the discussion really started with then the new party that took over with the three-part government, so the Liberals, the Greens, and the Social Democrats, and this was kind of a starting point. And now they are very much politically discussed, right? So the opposition is going very hard against a lot of those things, and we had like 2 Supreme Court decisions that were against those regulations in the last policies in the last, let's say, 3 years or something, right? So there's also an indication that there's a lot of things going on which are not like correctly done in a way, and this I think points to a very high politicization in Germany of this climate change discussion.
All right, well, that brings us to time. Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your findings, your research with us today. I would like to tell our audience members that there will be a written report that will also accompany Daniel's fellowship, so you'll have something else to kind of read. Anyway, it was great having you here in Washington, D.C., and I really wish you all the best for your research and your time once you return to Germany.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.